When Smile released in October 2022, there likely wasn't much anticipation that it was gonna leave the impact on the horror genre that it did. What initially seemed like a standard psychological thriller revealed itself as more of an intense exploration of fear, trauma, and the way we confront or avoid our deepest anxieties. It wasn't just the scares that stayed with you, but that dread that came with the overall themes of the movie, a testament to its clear knowledge of psychological horror. Now we're in 2024 and Smile 2 has arrived with the challenge of continuing what felt like a pretty one and done idea and deepening the ideas explored in the first. With a thorough focus on themes of trauma, mental health, fear as a contagion, and the increasingly blurring lines of reality, Smile 2 is bold in its attempts to expand the mythology of Parker Finn's world while taking outward risks to unnerve the audience. There's something deeply fascinating about this movie. Beyond the scares and psychological tension, Smile 2 manages to bridge that gap between fiction and reality in ways that the first film began to showcase throughout its marketing run. Through clever promotion of the movie's main character, it's able to reach into our world, daring us as an audience to question what part of the fear is real and what part of it is manufactured. That's just one of the many things that I wanted to talk about today surrounding what is, in my opinion, the biggest horror surprise of 2024. So with all the formalities out of the way on what is my birthday as you're watching this, let's get into everything scary about Smile 2. From its opening scene, not only does Parker Finn showcase how immensely his growth as a filmmaker has developed, but the film itself signals an intent to expand beyond the limited scope of its predecessor. While the original relied on an intimate, more isolated narrative with unsettling imagery and a creeping sense of dread, the sequel takes both of these elements and blows them up into a much more glamorized setting, entering much more ambitious territory, and intertwining its scares with the larger-than-life reality of a famous pop star. The horror transcends anything we saw in Smile 1, somehow feeling more personal and claustrophobic despite its expanded premise and world. Smile 2 amplifies the emotional stakes by exploring the internal struggles of Skye Riley, played by Naomi Scott, in a performance that, I think if not for the horror bias seen in so many award categories, should get recognised in some way. On one hand, Smile 2 is a bold attempt to elevate the original material, embracing an intelligent structure helmed mostly by the clear maturing in Finn's skill as a director. On the other, it is a clear departure from the bleak representation that the first film portrays, and fans who wanted more of that may feel a little let down, but I really can't see why most wouldn't consider the sequel an improvement in almost every way. I liked Smile 1. If you go back on this channel far enough, you'll find my thoughts on it from a few years ago, but even with that in mind, I feel like it's important to mention that the limitations within that film don't apply here at all. It's an all-around better experience, and there's really not a whole lot to dispute that. Smile 2 finds its place as a challenge to horror itself, with risky storytelling and themes that the series was previously critiqued for glorifying. And for me, it cemented itself as one of the many standout iterations of psychological horror because of the fact that it dares to dig deeper. While its predecessor explored trauma as an abstract force of fear, Smile 2 grounds it in the visceral reality of Skye Riley and her crumbling mental state. The film turns her life into a state of disarray where unprocessed guilt and buried pain are weaponized against her by the monstrosity. I'm only calling it this so I don't have to call it fucking Lollipop, creating a deeply personal and emotionally charged experience. From the beginning, her life is filled with unresolved trauma. As a pop star recovering from substance abuse and the guilt of her boyfriend's death in a car crash that she'd caused, the weight of her past hangs heavy on her shoulders. This struggle is represented by a toxic environment, the relentless pursuit of fame, the suffocating control of her manager and mother, and the superficial nature of everyone around her. The monstrosity exploits all of this, using her darkest memories as its arsenal. Her visions of the smiling figures and terrors blur that line between reality and hallucination, which makes her fear herself as much as the outside world, creating this intense lack of trust that worsens as the movie progresses. The flashback that showcases how Skye was responsible for the crash that killed Paul Hudson reveals that the guilt she feels is far from misplaced, and by making her relive that, the entity isn't even creating new horror, it's simply magnifying the fear already inside of her. In fact, a lot of the battle that Skye faces throughout this movie comes from that self-loathing and the emotional scars that have never really had that chance to heal. The monstrosity's influence is felt in how it isolates her. Her mother sees her as this fragile commodity rather than a daughter, while her friendships with characters like Gemma are fractured by past betrayals and behaviour. Even when she meets Morris, a character who offers a chance of hope with a plan to defeat the entity, their meeting is shrouded by distrust. By the time she attempts to fight back, she's already spiralling with her perception of reality, fractured by a blend of terror and manipulated interpretation. The movie's ending shows Skye's attempt to defeat the monstrosity as futile, as it's revealed that she has likely hallucinated a large part of this film's final act, in what is admittedly a really great fucking twist. By forcing Skye to confront this grotesque, demonic smiling version of herself, a literal manifestation of her inner demons, the film delivers on its ultimate thesis. Trauma can consume us if left unchecked. Skye's possession and inevitable death on stage serve as this passing of her pain onto others in both a literal and symbolic way, as her audience is unwittingly turned into thousands of hosts for the entity to latch onto. You see, trauma isn't just a theme here, it's the architect of the horror itself. The film forces us to confront how past mistakes, suppressed guilt, and unresolved grief can take on lives of their own, becoming forces that we can't escape nor fully comprehend. By combining these fears with demonic elements, Smile 2 delivers this highly unsettling exploration of the things we carry and what happens when we let them remain unchecked. One of the most unsettling ideas within the film is the exploration of fear as a contagious force. Just as a disease spreads through various means, fear injects the minds and multiplies, becoming an unstoppable wave of dread. This theme, first introduced in Smile 1, is expanded here with clarity, showing how the entity uses personal trauma to thrive. This entity is powered by emotional vulnerability, finding its host in moments of fear and despair. Skye's status as a world-known celebrity only amplifies this, turning her public breakdowns and eventual death during a live concert into a tragic spectacle, ensuring that the curse ends up spreading in a large-scale epidemic. This escalation also shifts the stakes for any potential future installments of the series. This thing is now a mass contagion. No longer is the fear isolated to individual cases, it's spreading rapidly through a collective trauma gained through one devastating moment. What helps this more is the deliberate ambiguity about how much of the spread is physical and how much is psychological. The entity doesn't just manipulate the victims, it makes them complicit in its actions. Skye's mother, her assistant Joshua, and even her fans all become carriers of her pain and fear. Society's fascination with Skye's struggles mirrors its morbid obsession with celebrity suffering. In their meeting at the diner, Morris compares the entity to a parasite that feeds on fear and survival. This frames the entity as something far more insidious than a supernatural villain. It becomes a commentary on how unresolved fear and trauma are passed along through relationships, media, and collective consciousness, creating a cycle of pain that sometimes feels inescapable. The third act delivers on this premise with genuinely scary clarity. When the entity possesses Skye during her performance, her death becomes the starting point for so many more stories of suffering. It's as if the film here is suggesting that fear, once unleashed, can't be contained. It finds a way to grow, evolve, and persist. By framing fear as this fatal contagion, Smile 2 speaks to a lot of cultural anxieties. How panic, trauma, and despair spread through media and personal interactions. The entity's power lies majorly in its capability to exploit the interconnectedness of human experience, and in a world as connected as ours, that's something we simply can't get away from.
Now, nearly 1 year ago, singer-songwriter and pop superstar Skye Riley was fighting for her life after being injured in a car accident. Ladies and gentlemen, the one and only Skye Riley.
Something deeply tied to the film's themes of control, manipulation, and performative identity was the marketing. Like its predecessor, Smile 2 pushed the boundaries between fiction and reality, going a step further here by making Skye Riley feel like a part of our world. Despite being fictional, we're able to listen to her music and even buy her merchandise, adding this layer of immersion that goes a long way in building this connection with the film. In the promotional build-up to the release of Smile 1, Paramount had employed marketers that saw actors portrayed as smilers infiltrating major public events like baseball games. This strategy was something that helped get this film the exposure that allowed it to be the financial success that it ultimately ended up being. Smile 2 builds on this, making Skye a pop culture figure in our world. Her songs are released on Spotify, and her branded merchandise makes her feel like a real celebrity. I like to think that this strategy almost ties into the nature of parasocial relationships that we very much experience in our world, where fans will form this one-sided connection with public figures or fictional characters. By making Skye a real-life pop star, Smile 2 exploits that dynamic, encouraging the audience to emotionally invest themselves in her story. This mirrors the way that the characters in the film, particularly Skye, are manipulated and controlled by forces that are beyond their control. It enhances the themes, making the horror feel real. Just as Skye's fate is shaped by those around her, the audience becomes complicit in this journey through the interactions with her public persona. The film and the marketing, once again, create this experience that extends far beyond our screens as the entity creeps further into the real world. One of the film's greatest strengths lies in that ability to immerse the audience through sight and sound. Building on the foundations established by Smile 1, the sequel lifts those technical elements to create an unrelenting horror. From the opening frames, the cinematography emphasises Skye's isolation, trapping her within these vast, bleak environments that swallow her. Sweeping shots are intercut with close-ups that feel claustrophobic, amplifying that vulnerability as the entity tightens its grip on her life. There are several instances of skewed framing, mirroring Skye's unravelling mental state and making the audience feel the same disorientation as her. One moment that stands out that proves this is the hallucination of Paul during the charity event. The use of camera work here is effective, with that soft glamour of the event overtaken by that harsh, intense focal shot of Skye as she reacts to what's happening before her. And if the visuals don't unsettle you, then the sound is most likely going to do it. Smile 2 heavily explores the significance of diegetic versus non-diegetic sound in evoking fear. I love the way this film remixes several of the melodies from her songs into the overall score, sometimes twisting and distorting the music into echoes that linger long after the credits are rolling. Then we have practical effects, or what sometimes feels like a little bit of a lack of. The entity is brought to life with a blend of practical and digital effects, maintaining the unnerving reality established in the first film. I love the way this grotesque monstrosity moves, bursting from her doppelganger on the stage, because it's this moment of body horror in a film that hasn't really delved into that at all until this point. I can't in good faith sit here and say that I love absolutely everything about this moment though. I do think that the composition at times and the way it looks in the scene feels a little off, and it's something that almost breaks it for me, but there's just about enough going for it to let me get through it. Smile 2 opts for a much more dynamic approach than its predecessor. Several elements implemented here help heighten that frenetic energy of Skye's descent into madness, contrasting with what feels like a slow burn terror in the first film. Additionally, the visual style of the sequel, using a vibrant palette to contrast against the horror, adds this distinct flair absent in the muted tones of the first. This evolution in style, on top of showing Parker Finn's evolution as a director, also reflects that shift from Rose's subdued personal horror to Skye's performative nightmare. Smile 2 leaves its audience with an enduring sense of fear. Where the first film delved into the isolated horrors of mental illness and inherited trauma, this broadens the scope to explore the sometimes performative nature of identity and the consequences of letting fear fester beneath the surface. Through Skye, the film doesn't just reflect fear, it becomes this mirror that asks us to confront our anxieties about control, perception, and loss of agency. The beauty and the terror of the Smile franchise lies in its ability to tap into a universal human fear while presenting it through deeply personal, intimate stories. With an unflinching dissection of trauma and its blend of psychological and body horror, Smile 2 ensures that any fear we experience is gonna be retained. It reminds us that fear isn't just this external force, and that it's something that lives within, feeding on our insecurities and doubts, simply waiting to be let inside.